What's up, y'all? Welcome into another edition of DNVR Rams Live, presented by our friends at Branded Bills. Head to brandedbills.com. Use that code BBDNVR for 15% off of your first order. Hope everybody is having an awesome start to their day. Big news coming out late last night. As a lot of you saw online, I think I got about 20 tweets telling me to wake up. I was sound asleep when Pete Thamel dropped this bombshell of a report. Seems like Kevin Lytle was as well. That's always a nightmare scenario when you are a reporter, a content creator like we are. Wake up and see that you've got 100 notifications. And thankfully, my boss, Harrison Wind, was able to get some content out for us on the DNVR Rams Twitter account. It seems like the reaction to this news has been pretty much excitement across the board, which is awesome. Love seeing how active the Toyota chat already is this morning. If you wouldn't mind giving us a thumbs up on YouTube, I certainly would appreciate it. But I do appreciate you guys taking some time to rock with me and talk about all of this. At the very end of the show, we will set the scene for the Air Force game. We'll talk about a big opportunity for the Hoops team in the Battle for Atlantis tournament as well. Those were going to be the primary focuses of today's show, but obviously we had to drop just about everything to hit on this. It did make me laugh, and I tried to warn people of this repeatedly, that this name kind of did come out of left field. I had talked about that a lot, about how the names that you hypothesize and everybody ends up fixating over for weeks and weeks, very rarely does that end up being the guy that gets hired. There are instances of it last year with Hoops and Ali Farokhmanesh that was particularly unique, obviously, where he was kind of the clear-cut favorite, but they certainly did an extensive search and they did look at a lot of other guys. This time around, I was really impressed with CSU and the way that they were able to keep this search under wraps. Basically, nobody locally or nationally had anything of substance. There were a couple of names that were very clearly floated by agents that never really felt like realistic options for CSU. But I do think that while it was a struggle for somebody like me, who's a podcast host, a writer, and I'm in the business of information, it's obviously not super ideal for me in that sense, but it is a good indication of the general state of the athletic department. I think this was a situation where really only the people in the know were involved in this. And obviously, when it ultimately did break last night, the wheels seemed to be set into motion pretty quickly. UConn wrapped up their regular season last week. This comes out late Tuesday night. Again, did catch me off guard, caught a lot of us off guard, but I'm thankful for it. I'm thankful that we don't have to continue to do all the hypothetical scenarios and what about this guy and well, what about him? And we'll do a little bit of that when it comes to his staff construction and whatnot. But I really feel like my general instant reaction to this was about as good of a name as you could hope for if you were in CSU's position, at least out of the realistic targets. If you want to throw out Nick Saban and Lane Kiffin and those type of names, sure, yeah, there are more exciting coaches in the world. But to get a guy who has essentially a quarter century's experience of coaching in the NFL, over a decade of collegiate experience, and a track record of success in this modern era of college football, which is important. I genuinely believe that Jay Norvell is a good football coach. I think he struggled to evolve with a game that has modernized rapidly and obviously has seen drastic change in really the last 3-4 years. Just the amount of change we've seen has been crazy. Those who are able to evolve will continue to succeed. Those who struggle will certainly become relics. And I think there was kind of some of that with Joe Parker and Jay Norvell being in this together. You know, early on, Joe especially was certainly anti-NIL and anti-anything that had to do with modernizing, and it was a big factor. You know, it was a big factor in the downfall of CSU, a big reason why it just did not work out with him, as well as, you know, the inability to develop a quarterback and a lot of other things that we could dive into. But again, I really feel like as far as the realistic options on the table for CSU, guys like him, you know, potentially some of those FCS stars and Polasek, who's obviously staying at North Dakota State now, Vigan at Montana State, Tim Plow, UC Davis, those types of guys, I think this is a really solid hire. You are getting somebody who has a track record of success both in the NFL and in the collegiate ranks. He obviously is a name that carries some pedigree as well, given that he and his dad are very long associated with football. There's something to be said about that, for those that are too young to know. His dad, Jim Mora Jr., a great NFL coach for years and years, had the legendary bit that is now on the Coors Light commercial. Playoffs, talking about playoffs. Maybe his son could lead CSU to the playoffs. I don't know, but I feel really good about the state of this program moving forward. I am going to talk about his resume. We're going to talk about what we know. We're going to talk about the timeline, all of that fun stuff. If you've got questions, comments, etc., keep them firing in the Toyota chat. I'm going to try and get through some of the stuff I have on the rundown early on, but Alyssa, our awesome producer, can star some of the questions and comments, and we can come back full circle at the end of the show. I know a lot of you are going to have a lot that you want me to touch on, and I am going to hit on as much of it as possible. I think I want to start with what Mora did at UConn, because on the surface, a 64-year-old head coach is probably not what a lot of people were anticipating out of this. I think a lot of people were kind of expecting maybe a young up-and-comer. Colin Klein fits that profile, or somebody out of the FCS ranks. But I think at this stage of his career, it makes a lot of sense. For one thing, I think he grew up in Colorado or spent an extensive part of his childhood in Boulder. But he's a guy with West Coast roots, played at Washington, started his coaching career as a GAA at the University of Washington, worked for, the Chargers and a variety of teams on this half of the country. I don't think he's an East Coast guy naturally, although, with coaching, you're going to move all over the country, and he's certainly been all over. But I think he's the right type of profile to come in, stabilize things. I mean, winning 9 games in back-to-back seasons at UConn, that's nothing to scoff at. They had one winning season in 11 years before him, and really a good season for UConn historically was scrapping a 6-6 year, maybe going 7-5, something like that. He goes to a bowl game in 3 or 4 years, back-to-back 9-win seasons. UConn's only won 9 games 3 times in its history, and 2 of those were in the last couple of years under Mora. It really has been impressive what he's been able to do there. And you got to remember, on top of that, UConn's in a really weird state as a program. They're most certainly a basketball school. It's not that different in the sense of Jay Norvell wanting to go to a school that maybe prioritizes football historically more so than basketball versus, a Nevada, UConn, where basketball is where they make their bread and butter. But because UConn is in the Big East, which no longer has football, their football program is kind of in limbo at the moment. They're independent. I know all the UConn fans are clamoring that the Big Ten and the Big 12 are both fighting over UConn, and the future is very bright. And maybe that is true. I mean, what they've done from a basketball standpoint in the 21st century is pretty incredible. They are most certainly one of the premier brands in college basketball. They're a blue blood. Despite the geography of it, if you could have UConn as an all-sports member in the Pac-12, I would be for it, just because their basketball brand really is that powerful. That said, it hasn't, traditionally translated on the football side of things. And what he's been able to do in a really short span there is a testament to his job. Now, I do think that UConn has probably committed more, very similarly to CSU, to the athletic department as a whole. They've invested more in football. I think they're swinging bigger than they used to. And there's probably some of that to contribute to his success as well. If you're not at a school that is institutionally in line, that is willing to commit to your success, it's going to be tough to pull it off. But that's the thing about CSU that we've talked about repeatedly over the last decade, especially really going back to the construction of Campus Stadium. Everything is in place as far as resources go for CSU. I mean, you have an incredible on-campus facility. You've got a practice field, outdoor, and you've got an indoor. The indoor setup's not phenomenal, but they practice outside most of the time. Anyways, you're going to play in elements in Colorado. You might as well prepare for it. They've got staff investment. They've got player personnel investment. I mean, really, especially going into this year where they increase the staff resources even more. there were no excuses for Norvell, and that was a big part of, this season being so disappointed, as you felt like coming off of the 8-win year, and now we're really sparing no expense, loading up in a year where you knew the Mountain West was going to be wide open, and has proved to be worse than I expected. It just has not worked out. And I know that some people will roll their eyes and say, well, we've already bet on the coach who comes from a place that didn't bet on, or that didn't historically commit itself to football, or really prioritize football in the same way, and it didn't work out. But I've pointed out multiple times, you can't just eliminate a potential good candidate just because something you've tried in the past didn't play out the way that you hoped. There are a lot of circumstances that went into the Norvell era being a disappointment in the end, really is what it was. It was crazy how bad things got at the very end, especially considering the hope that people had going into the season. But I like the idea of bringing in somebody who's experienced the game at multiple levels, who's been able to win at a place, where historically that's been an uphill battle. I think that's important for a school like CSU. And I think based on what he's done, especially recently, is really exciting. And while it didn't work out for Norvell, I do think that is a logical thought process. Like, look at what he is doing there with this wonky program that's independent. They have to travel all over the country because their scheduling's wonky. You don't have the conference affiliation. Let's bring him to a place where he's got West Coast roots, where he's going to have community investment, he's going to have institutional support, he's going to have an admin that's aligned and driven to compete at the highest level in athletics. Just because the results have not been there does not mean that this is an appealing job. That's the disconnect between a lot of fans and those that are, actually in this industry. Coaches across the board, a lot of national writers, they've long talked about the potential of CSU because you have everything there. You have a school that wants to spend, you have the resources, you have a great college town, you have a great school. Like, there's no reason in theory that CSU should not be able to compete in football, especially when you look at what programs in the region have been able to do. Teams like Utah, who you were peers with for decades and decades. I mean, I think it's been a sleeping giant for a long time, and they've done a lot of things right. Just for whatever reason, the winning has not panned out. Hopefully Mora is the guy that is able to take everything that he's going to have, to work with, and finally get it all to click. It just, outside of McElwain, has not been the case. And I know, again, 64-year-old coach, you're going to get people that bring up longevity and potential concerns there. I think that's valid. I also think when you look at the history of the program, and the fact of the matter is CSU's had one coach hired away ever. And if CSU happens to be rolling enough, in these next couple of years to where he lands a Power 4 gig, well, that means the program is night and day from where it's at right now, because it's been a disastrous season. It's been a shit show of a decade, really decade plus. This is a guy who has proven he can do it, and now gives you a chance to stabilize things going into the Pac-12, which is what you desperately need. And you needed to generate some buzz. You needed to generate some excitement, and when you look at what a lot of these people on a national level are saying, and the Rams are getting a ton of props from the national pundits. I'm even seeing comments from rivals praising CSU. It's the complete opposite of Adazio, certainly. I mean, when CSU announced Adazio, I've never seen a fan base be more like, what the hell? And Boston College fans were basically saying prayers for CSU, wishing us luck. I mean, we're seeing a lot of salty posts from East Coast pundits, from their talking heads, CSU, what the hell? And to me, that says that they're disappointed to lose a quality coach. I think that the reaction was pretty positive to Norvell, but I don't think that it got the love nationally that this move is getting right now. We don't have an official confirmation from CSU as of yet. I expect that within the day. We do have a statement from UConn, though, that I will read after the break. Let me shout out a couple of our partners. Keep the comments rolling. I love seeing how active the Toyota chat is. Let's shout out a couple of our partners, and then we will get into the rest. All right, with the holiday season coming up, it's a great time to get the hardworking man in your life some new boots. Brunt's best-selling Marin work boots are built for the toughest job sites. They're completely waterproof, so whether it's rain, mud, or standing water, your feet are going to stay dry. From oily workshop floors to muddy farm fields, everything in between. The Marin 6-inch soft toe is built for workers across a variety of trades. The thing about Brunt is they were created by genuine blue-collar people who have blue-collar friends, and what a lot of people in these fields have come to realize is that in recent years, some of the more popular traditional brands had kind of abandoned their audience. They're trying to be a fashion brand now. They are not looking out for the people that need these day in and day out. With temps dropping, the holidays coming up, time to treat yourself or the hardworking man to real comfort. Skip the throwaway gifts, get him something built to last. Brunt Workwear listeners get $10 off their order with the code DNVR at checkout. That's bruntworkwear.com. Use the code DNVR. Order today. Let them know that you heard it here on the show. Hey, Colorado, stop by your local Dick's Sporting Goods for the hottest apparel and footwear from top brands like Nike, Adidas, Original, Hoka, DNVR, and more. You can score the latest equipment for any sport in your life. Baseball, football, golf, soccer, basketball, you name it, they've got it. They've got all your tailgating essentials. I can blow an hour in there easily just looking at like the cool tailgating chairs and the fancy coolers. I mean, the cooler technology these days, absurd. If you find a lower price, they'll match it with their best price guarantee. Get your gear fast with free curbside pickup at your nearest store or easy shipping from Dicks.com, because every season starts at Dick's. All right, I think there's a good comment here from Rai Dan, I believe, in the Toyota chat saying, maybe wait to set some expectations for what year one looks like until we see, how the staff is finalized, what happens with the roster. There's a lot that's still in flux as of now. But what's exciting is you've got your guy. He has a record of 73-53 in the collegiate ranks, 31-33 in the NFL too. So he's not one of those guys who was just a train wreck as an NFL head coach and had to go crawling back to college. In fact, it's kind of the opposite. He was a longtime NFL assistant. Obviously, his dad, a longtime NFL coach. Started as a GA at Washington, but then he was a defensive quality control assistant for the San Diego Chargers back then. Eventually became the DB coach, worked with the Saints, the 49ers, the Falcons, where he was the head coach. Seattle, he was the associate head coach when they had a nice little run there with like Sean Alexander, Tim Hasselbeck, some of those guys. Was at UCLA from 2012 through 2017. Had a good stretch there, did kind of fizzle out at the end. Ultimately ended up at UConn, where, again, he really had success that was historically unprecedented. Ooh, looks like we got a comment here potentially from a UConn fan, getting a solid hire, not having to be playing musical chairs during this crazy stacked coaching carousel is awesome. Maybe not a UConn fan based on that. Maybe read it wrong. But again, great to see the Toyota chat so active. He's somebody who has a lot of experience in the NFL. That name brand recognition does mean something, maybe less so with some of the younger kids. I don't know how many 18-year-olds are that aware of Jim Mora or her dad or his dad outside of we got the official release here. Sorry, I kind of went off track. It is official now from CSU. Here is a quote. Our goal from the very start was to execute a comprehensive search to find the next leader of the Colorado State football program, John Weber said. We did that. It was extremely energizing to have such significant interest from so many accomplished coaches. From our very first conversation, Coach Mora's desire to serve student athletes, his comprehensive experience, and passion to win was evident. I could not be more excited to welcome Jim and his wife, Kathy, to CSU and Fort Collins. Mora will be publicly introduced on Monday, December 1st at 3 p.m. Fans are encouraged to attend. This is a quote from Jim Mora. I would like to thank President Amy Parsons, Director of Athletics John Weber, and those involved for providing Kathy and I this very special opportunity. I am truly humbled to join CSU as we transition to the Pac-12 conference. I am excited to meet the team and look forward to connecting with former players. I can't wait for our family to become part of the Northern Colorado community. They point out how he has over 35 years of coaching experience. A lot of the stuff we've talked about, I'll dive into that press release a little bit later. That got me a little bit frazzled. It's been a morning of information flying in, but love that it is now confirmed. We don't have to talk in hypotheticals or speculate. I mean, again, as I wrote this morning, I expected that announcement to come. UConn had already released a statement last night confirming that he had accepted the CSU job. It came out this morning that he had informed the UConn team. So like all the writing was on the wall, but until you get that official confirmation from your school, things can be a little bit wonky. Before I read that, somebody in the Toyota chat mentioned that it is nice to have your coach in place in a really chaotic time. I think that is a very astute observation. I've talked about that a lot. I think it's already been chaotic, and it's only going to get more weird once Lane Kiffin makes his decision. But the potential fallout from that and the dominoes that are still to fall, I mean, this really could have drug out. You don't want to potentially get leveraged. If you have somebody who you view as a quality candidate who's on board, who's down to try and revitalize this program going into the Pac-12, you want to get that deal done. We'll be interested to see what that money looks like as far as salary. His base salary based on his most recent extension was going to be an average of roughly $2.5 million. I don't think he was quite at that yet, but that's where it was heading. Based on that, I would assume that CSU's probably got him north of $3 million, which would be the most they've ever spent on a football coach. His buyout is $1.5 million from UConn, though you do have some money from the Medved buyout to potentially play with. That was one of the things I talked about being a subtle benefit, and going with Ali Farouk-Manesh is you saved a lot of money with him being a young first-time coach. You weren't going to pay him what you paid Medved right off the bat, plus you get that buyout from Minnesota on top of it. So you had some open money to work with, and you were going to need that, obviously, to both buy out Norvell and now pay a buyout to hire Jim Mora away from UConn. Norvell's assistant pool was around $3 million at the end. I do wonder what that looks like as well. Would like to see it be more like 4 or 5, ideally. It is reported by Pete Nakos that executive director of football, Justin Cummings-Morrow, is expected to come with him. He was essentially their DFO, but then had gotten promoted the last couple years, fancy new title. I'm curious to see what that means for him at CSU. Is he in more of a DFO role? Is he in more of a general manager type role? Because obviously that has significant impact on, who could potentially be retained moving forward. I do wonder, does he bring his offensive coordinator with him? Jordan Samus, I'm not 100% sure if I'm pronouncing that correctly. He's currently the interim head coach at UConn, so if he does end up coming, it'll probably be a while before we know that. Former offensive line coach, was the run game coordinator at one point. Got elevated a couple of years ago, and obviously their offense has been tremendous of late. I mean, UConn had a top 20 scoring offense this year, averaged about 37 points per game. Some room to improve defensively. I do wonder, would you potentially consider hanging on to Tyson Summers as a defensive coordinator if he was willing to stick around? One, just to have a little bit of continuity. Two, while the defense has not been anything to pound your chest over this year, I will say that I don't think defense has been this team's issue most consistently, at least, and the injuries on that side of the ball really impacted things. That could be something to keep an eye on. I am curious to see if there's anybody retained, from the current staff whatsoever, what that process kind of looks like. Interesting comment from my guy Josh here in the Toyota chat. Show me Jerry Neuheisel Jr. at OC was QB at UCLA under Mora. That's a great point, something I didn't consider. I like that a lot. If you don't end up bringing your guy with you, I think if he can bring his OC based on their current track record together, that's probably the most optimal scenario. That said, having a young guy like Jerry, who you could potentially groom to be, his successor as well. Now my wheels are turning. I kind of like the thought of that. That could be a fun little scenario. That I don't want to get too derailed by that, but that's a great point. And I do think that is something to consider. Again, I think people get too fixated on, well, is he going to be here in 5 years? I mean, so much changes in 5 years, as we've already seen. let's win now. Let's cross that bridge down the line. But given that he is 64 years old, you are going to have somebody to take the keys. The most ideal scenario would be that you have a bunch of success and then, maybe Mora rides off into the sunset and you hand it to his right-hand man, which could potentially be his former quarterback and Jerry Neuheisel Jr. That's 100% speculation. I don't have anything that's like, keep an eye on this. That was just a great comment from the Toyota chat that I wanted to give my 2 cents on. But I am interested to see what that staff looks like. And again, I do wonder if potentially Tyson Summers could be somebody who sticks around, maybe even just for the first year as DC. One of the comments here says, not a big fan of Summers and his staff after these past couple of games. Fair. He's not been a good head coach. It did not go well for him at Georgia Southern. I also think, being fair to him, it's pretty much impossible to succeed with the current state of this roster, between the injuries and then just the emotional baggage of firing a coach in season, 3 offensive play callers. Like, it's been a lot on these kids. Injuries, I think, is the biggest reason why CSU struggled this year. But he certainly hasn't made it a situation where anybody was clamoring for him to get the job in the full-time capacity. But I do think also that some guys just happen to be good coordinators and they're not head coaches. The best defensive coordinators in Denver Broncos history, at least modern Broncos history, I don't want to overstep because I know there were some dominant days with the Orange Crush, but you look at somebody like Wade Phillips, you look at what Vance Joseph's doing right now. Both those guys were catastrophic as head coaches, but they are damn good defensive coordinators. I think Mike Bobo is a top 10 offensive coordinator in college football, maybe even top 5. I think he's offensively brilliant. He struggled as a head coach. Some guys are better suited to be in certain roles, and that very well could be the case with somebody like Summers. I just do think that you ideally would have some type of continuity if you could, maybe not a ton. You're mostly going to want the staff to be your guys. But when you look at the offensive side of things, like outside of Bill Best, the O-line coach, I don't really think there's anybody who would be in line to stick around. Certainly not going to keep Norvell's right-hand guys. I don't know who it would be outside of the potentially some of the defensive coaches if you were going to retain anybody. But then again, in the portal era, maybe it doesn't matter as much anyways, because there's probably not going to be a ton of dudes from this past iteration of CSU that end up being a significant part of the next, generation of CSU football, if you will. But there certainly are some guys that you'd love to be able to stick around. And I have seen some posts from family members of current players that seem excited about this hire. And that's intriguing because there are, again, some building blocks who you would love to be able to keep in the picture in an ideal scenario. And that might be the focus of Monday's show altogether, just kind of the top guys to keep an eye on, who you might be able to get to stick around, some potential portal targets as well. I think we'll start getting a lot of that information here in the coming days. As far as the timeline goes, and I know there's a lot of confusion on this because we've seen so much change with college football in the recent years. The transfer portal will officially open up for the current players on the roster 5 days from today, now that it's an official hire. The same goes for UConn based on whenever they hire their next head coach. 5 days after that, the portal opens for their roster. But the portal for everyone's in January anyways. So a lot of that movement is going to happen in January. The high school signing period is December 3rd, and I am curious to see kind of what happens with all that. How many of the current commits, we've already seen CSU lose a small handful of guys to other schools, which was to be expected. But that's kind of what the upcoming window looks like and what the timeline is going to be from a recruitment standpoint. In 5 days, we'll see the portal open up for CSU. 5 days after the UConn head coach is hired, the portal opens for their players. And obviously you would expect at least a small handful to follow more to CSU. That just tends to be what happens these days. And then the major portal, where I imagine a significant portion of next year's starters are probably going to have to come from. That'll be in January. So we're going to have a lot to keep an eye on in the coming weeks. Let me shout out a couple other of our partners. I'll keep this rolling. If you're tuned in on Twitter, come on over to YouTube. It's more fun. You can get in the Toyota chat. Helps our metrics. I certainly would appreciate it. I am stoked. I'm stoked that CSU has a new head coach. I'm stoked to be associated with our awesome partners over at Game Time. With Game Time, there's no better app to get the best deals on tickets for all the events. I'm talking sporting events. I'm talking theater, comedy. If it's a ticketed event here in this wonderful state, Game Time is very likely the place to get your tickets. I love Game Time because the app is really easy to use. You know, I'm not the brightest guy in the world. It's got to be pretty intuitive. Game Time, super easy. They don't hit you with a bunch of last minute fees, which that's something I really appreciate. I know I'm only 30 years old, but I'm 55 at heart. And one of my biggest old man rants is how BS so many of these service charge fees are. I'm doing all the work. What is exactly this service charge? Anyways, Game Time is 100% authentic tickets on time at the best price. They've got tickets for CSU hoops, for the Avs, the Nuggets, the Broncos, you name it, they've got it. Take the guesswork out of buying NCAA tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use that code DNVR for $20 off your first purchase. Terms to apply. Again, create an account, redeem that code DNVR for $20 off. Tap, ticket, go. Download the Game Time app today. Eric Simmons says, thoughts on the hire? I think it's a solid hire. I say this with all love, buddy. We've been talking about it for 30 minutes, but you can always rewind if you missed it. And again, I do say that with love. I appreciate everybody that's rocking with us. And I also, while it was kind of a nightmare scenario for me to wake up to 100 notifications and realize that I had slept through missed calls and texts from coworkers and Slack notifications and 15 people tweeting at me to, wake up and give my take, to do an emergency podcast. I do appreciate how many of you want to come to the show and hear what I have to say when something big in the CSU community happens. It means a lot. I appreciate the support that we have within the CSU Rams community. And I think to see the growth of the community this year, despite it being a season from hell, potentially being, the first 10-loss season since the late 80s is pretty cool. And I am very optimistic for what these next couple of years can potentially be, given this hire, given the move to the Pac-12. I think we're in line for some fun. And frankly, I think we're about damn due. If anybody has paid their dues, has paid the penance for having a successful stretch under Sonny, I think we're due at this point for things to flip our way. We were owed just a little bit of good karma. I mean, I know in this process, somebody's always losing. If you're a UConn fan, you're like, well, piss off. Now you're taking our guy. I get that. It's how all of this works. But it's been a rough stretch. It's been a tough stretch to be a Ram fan. I had a couple of people jokingly text me about the Josh Allen stuff, when he said it always sucks to be a CSU Ram during his jersey retirement speech. It wasn't that far from the truth at the moment. I mean, it certainly had not been a banner season for the program, coming off of a game where your quarterback spits on the opposition, and Hoops just blew a big game, although the women's team continues to roll. Want to shout out the ladies, but it's been a tough stretch, and I feel like we've had to do a lot of therapy hours. I've been Dr. Phil mode far too often on this podcast over the last 5 years. And man, would it be fun to get this thing rolling again. And if that means that 3-4 years from now, Mora's going to Washington as head coach there, at least this program is in a far better position than it was. And again, who knows, maybe you're in a spot where you are able to hand the keys off to, somebody else. And there's potentially a sustained stretch that comes out of that, like continuity within your staff can be a major key. I'm really excited about what this means. I'm curious what UConn players might follow him. Everybody obviously had their eyes on the quarterback who had an incredible season this year. Fajano? Don't want to pronounce that one incorrectly based on the spelling. Completed 69%, threw for almost 3,500 yards, 28 touchdowns, only one interception. And the one interception, I believe, was against Air Force, like in one of their most recent games. So he almost went an entire season without throwing an interception. UConn, a really balanced offense this year. They had a 1,000-yard rusher, 1,000-yard receiver, a quarterback who put up a career year. One of the more fun teams to watch this season. And I think based on this abysmal stretch of not only bad football, but just a boring product altogether, which is really the worst 1-2 punch you can have as a fan. Not only do we suck, we're not even fun to watch. At least in stages of the Fairchild era, it was really bad at the end. But at least in stages of the Fairchild era, 08, 09, yeah, they might win 3 games, but every game's like 43-35. When you're just getting curb stomped, when you can't move the ball, when you've gone almost half of your season getting shut out from a quarters played standpoint, it's tough to stomach. And to get a guy who can hopefully come in and revitalize your offense right away, get it rolling, that's just really exciting. Now, who the quarterback is going to be a big factor in all of that. I already said on Monday that I would be shocked if the starting quarterback for next season is currently on the roster. To be honest with you, I'd be surprised if any of those quarterbacks are back. You never know. Again, like maybe somebody like Brousseau is willing to just spend his last year at CSU, content being the backup. I don't know, but I don't think he can be the guy if you want to really hit the ground running, and that's obviously going to be the hope. I did see a report that one of their featured running backs, not their 1,000-yard rusher this year, but Victor Rosa has already posted about entering the portal. He had 11 touchdowns in 2022. Just did a quick research on him. Third string, it says here in the Toyota chat. I know he'd been marred by injuries. Again, 11 touchdowns in 2022, though. So maybe somebody to keep an eye on. Again, that's just speculation. I've seen a lot of comments about people are going to have to open up the checkbook. Jim Mora was pretty open about the lack of NIL commitment on the football side of things at UConn. I think that compared to most of its peers, CSU football has pretty decent NIL. There's levels to this. They're certainly not going to have the money that the big boys have. But I do hope that with a hire that is seemingly well received from the fan base and the supporters, that maybe we see an uptick in terms of NIL investment. I'm always hesitant to talk about that kind of stuff because, to be honest with you, the reality is if you don't invest in NIL as a fan base, you're not going to have an opportunity to compete at the highest level. Now, some of the rev share stuff, I think that evens some things out to an extent, but there's still always going to be those side deals. There's still going to be, schools throwing a ton of cash at players, and there's going to be rev share everywhere. So like the more bang you get as a player, that's what you are going to chase. I also feel kind of icky about it, though, because I understand how many people are diehard fans and would absolutely kill for CSU to succeed at the highest level. They bleed green and gold. They would slit their wrists, donate their blood if they could, but they just simply do not have the financial means to commit to NIL. And honestly, it shouldn't be on the fans, in my opinion, anyways, to support all this. I understand this is where we're at. When it comes to college football, there are pretty intense realities that it is what it is. If you want to compete, you need the NIL. It is that simple. At the same time, I'm not going to shame anybody that doesn't want to commit to NIL or can't. You are right about that. We missed one of our reads on the show. I'm killing it this morning. My head is all over the place. Need to commit to NIL. If you want to ride in style, do it with our friends Toyota. Trucks have always been a part of Toyota's DNA for generations. Toyota's built durable legends destined for greatness, perfect for Colorado. Whether you're conquering off-road trails or hauling the weight of the world, there's a Toyota truck that's just right for you, like the Tacoma. Toyota offers 17 models available all-wheel drive or four-wheel drive, like the Epic 4Runner. They also offer more low-end, zero-emission vehicles combined than any other automaker. 16 hybrid vehicles to choose from, like the Tundra iForce Max hybrid truck. Toyota SUVs take command on the road and on the trail. Perfect if you're going through the snowy mountains or if you're just cruising around Cap Hill, something like that. Toyota is a proud partner of CSU Athletics. They are the official vehicle of DNVR. Toyota, let's go places. It's almost Toyota-thon. You know it. Shout out to the Toyota stands. I had a post yesterday on Twitter where I said Feast Week is greater than the NBA Cup, and somebody said Honda Days or whatever it is, and I replied with a meme of, I think it's the Georgia Tech coach, saying is Powerade. We're a Coca-Cola school, and getting asked about a Gatorade bath. We are a Toyota program around here. We are loyal to the brands that support us. But shout out to Toyota. I did not mean to skip over them. Sorry, we've been a little all over the place today. I'm just now like getting my heart rate down after waking up in general panic and trying to get the newsletter out and get a piece up on the story and get as much research done as I could. I mean, there were a lot of coaches we talked about pretty repeatedly in this process, so I could have gone live on the fly, Vigan, Polasek, those types of dudes. But this is one I didn't see coming, and really that's because I was under the assumption that Jim Mora would land a power forward job just based on what he did from a success standpoint at a place where it's unprecedented. I figured he would wait around, maybe land an ACC gig or something like that, but also maybe he had a real desire to come out west, and what's potentially, the loss of some of those other schools on the other side of the country is a big game, or is a big gain for CSU. Kevin in the Toyota chat says CSU News just made the Pat McAfee show while Saban was on. Look at us getting a little bit of love from McAfee. He's not really my cup of tea, to be honest with you. I think he has his place, doing his role, and I get why people love him. I'm more of like a Dan Patrick show vibe, which again, going back to the concept of me being 55 at 30, that checks. What are you into, J Mike? The Dan Patrick show, PTI, reading print newspaper, all the standard old man shit. Let me go to the Toyota chat. Let me get into some of these questions and comments. And then we'll talk CSU Air Force. Then we will talk final thoughts on this. We'll talk about the battle for Atlantis. CSU Hoops taking on Virginia Tech this afternoon. I feel like that one's been kind of a coin flip as far as the metrics go. I know Ken Palm originally had Vautech and then had CSU winning. And then obviously post DU, our metrics have taken a hit. Now they have Vautech winning a 2-point game again. A big opportunity, though, for the Rams to put some meat on the resume. Definitely would love to see them pull out the win. All right, let me go to the Toyota chat. Seems like a great hire. Justin, what number of wins should we expect? That's from Lance. I think a lot of that is going to be dependent on, one, who the quarterback is. I mean, it's a quarterback game. If you can land somebody who's competent right away, that's going to drastically elevate your ceiling as a team, and is probably good for 2, 3, maybe even 4 wins. I think staff and how much player turnover you ultimately end up happening. I mean, if you keep some of your top guys around, if you're able to keep some of these intriguing running backs, the Owen Longs and Tanner Morleys of the world, those type of players, then I think there's a world in which you're able to compete right away. And we've seen schools like UNLV, New Mexico this year be able to do that. The portal era can be brutal when you're on the losing side of things. It can also be a great way to flip things pretty quickly, and we've seen that. And I think that's what's exciting is these days it's not really we'll see where we're at in 3 years. It's really more like a year and a half is kind of like when you've got to get it rolling. If you don't, people get impatient. Tacos Pal Store says possible transfers he can bring. I'll have to dive into that. I didn't have a chance to look at a lot of their eligibility. I just looked at a couple of their key guys. Saw quarterback was out of eligibility. I think their star receiver is also out of eligibility. So I'll have to dive into some of that, but that'll certainly be something I write about and we'll talk about on the show on Monday after the holidays. Big Berna 4473. Are you not worried about him not having recruitment roots in the region? I don't think that's necessarily true. I mean, he spent a significant time at UCLA, 6 years there. Southern California, Arizona, the Pacific Northwest, that's all UCLA's recruiting grounds. We're in the same circles with schools like UCLA pretty consistently. So I actually think I think he does have some roots out here, although obviously not what he had been leaning on of late. But if you remember back, he decommitted. I'm drawing a blank on his name. I think it's Jaden Fox, the running back out of Cherry Creek, who recently committed to Boise. He was committed to UConn. So I mean, they'd been recruiting in Colorado even as about as far of an East Coast based program as you could be. Andy says, should we have high expectations and a win now mentality? Again, expectations exactly where they're set is going to be determinant on what this first recruiting class ultimately looks like. And that's going to come together over the next 6 weeks or so. But in the modern era, yeah, I mean, it's not a situation where you're hoping for, like early McElwain, even where it was like 3-9. I think you're hoping for like a bowl game at minimum in first year, and then like competing for championships in year 2 is kind of the mind frame in modern college football. Is he bringing a quarterback with him? We don't know yet. The quarterback that started for UConn this year is out of eligibility. Dolph Renaud, longtime supporter of the show. Good to see you, buddy. Would BFN want to return under Mora? Would we want him? No one can deny he is talented. Yeah, you would like to keep him around if you could. I know that a lot of the fans will roll their eyes when I say that. I know that some people are irked with how it played out, feel like he quit on the team. All of your criticisms are valid. He struggled much more so than I ever would have anticipated. I think he got himself into some rough spots with some of the stuff he said in the offseason before 2024. He didn't play well this year. I also have heard he was injured. I think it was a tough spot. Really got thrown under the bus pretty hard by his coach in a way that was surprising to me. The arm talent is there. The physical traits are there. It's a gamble in the portal. You don't know what you're going to land. So if you could have him around, yeah, you still under that scenario would absolutely hope to bring in 2, potentially even 3 other suitors to compete with him. That was part of the problem. Once BFN took the reins from Clay Millen, never really had a true quarterback competition again until it was a place where, he was being usurped by Brousseau. So I think competition at the position as a whole is going to be important. But yes, if you're asking me, would you take BFN back if he wanted to? I would, because he's got arm talent and quarterbacks are hard to come by. So you want to stockpile as many on the roster as you possibly can have. I don't expect that. I would be very surprised if that were to happen. I do think that the relationship between BFN and CSU and the community is pretty strained. And, the fans were really hard on him. Like, it was bad, but I do wonder if some of the people that got real nasty with him at the end, based on what they saw from the offense for the rest of the year, like, all right, it wasn't all on this kid. D. Starkey says, at work, so can't hang around too long. Do you think this hire moved the needle enough to keep some good players around? Love the show. Keep up the good work. First of all, thank you for the support. Second of all, I think it's about as good of a hire as you could hope for. And based on that, you have a shot. There's no guaranteeing a lot of these kids, especially, the Owen Longs of the world, they're going to have big time offers from some of the, most significant programs in the country, kind of like Cayenne Evans with North Carolina. It's hard to turn down the brand and the paycheck. It's one thing if you're just jumping to a bigger school when they're throwing $2 million at you, though, that's a different scenario. And so I think that a guy like Mora would be intriguing to guys that hope to get to the league. I mean, he's got an NFL background. You're going to have visibility on the program. There's going to be NFL teams around because of those relationships that the Mora family has established over the last 50 plus years in major football. I mean, that stuff has value. And I hope that at least some of the guys who I had heard were basically, out the door will at least take the time to meet with them and consider all their options. I don't blame anybody that leaves after how this season has played out. And in a lot of sense, I think that the program kind of just needs a refresh as a whole. And I think that a new staff, largely new roster, you don't want to see everyone leave. There's some young guys who haven't even had an opportunity to show what they can do yet. I'm just thinking back to some of the last couple of cycles. Like, obviously I've been really high on Tanner Morley for a long time. Cannon Valenzuela was probably my favorite signing from the class last year. We haven't even seen him yet. Like there are guys you'd love to hang on to. You would have loved to have been able to hang on to Jalen Dupree. Maybe he could change his mind now. We shall see. But I think that this was the type of hire you needed to get some juice for the program going again. And as Taylor mentions, we've got a week 1 border war before, BYU comes to town a couple weeks later. And then, you kick off the Pac-12 era. Like there's real buzz with this program right now. And if they're able to capitalize on that moment, I mean, imagine a hot start, get the boot back week 1, maybe beat a Big 12 team and BYU, start the Pac-12 era off with a bang. That'd be so sick. I'm so starved at this point to cover a fun football team. Like, genuinely, the 2024 team is the most fun season I've gotten to cover in a decade on the beat, because 2017 had some moments, but then the collapse and the Boise State loss and Josh Allen and everything that went into that, it was a pretty tough blow when it was all said and done. The bowl game was a big bummer last year, but you still had a fun stretch. You beat Air Force and Wyoming. The Utah State comeback to end the regular season got a little bit more excitement going after the Fresno State loss. Give me a bone, man. Football gods, give me something. Give me something to cover next year. Before we get out of here, I want to talk about this Air Force matchup. I do want to talk about a big opportunity for CSU men's basketball as well. Here's a good question I'll get to, though. Surely there are some downsides. What would you say the most significant downside is? That's an interesting perspective. Probably the fact that he's a 64-year-old coach. You know, if he still has the desire to coach a bigger school, you know, a traditional Power 4 school. I know what we're calling the Pac-12 at this point. It's all kind of semantics, but I think that, like, if he's wanted to end at a Washington where he played, then he's probably going to try and do that pretty quickly. You know, probably trying to do like a Barry Odom type scenario, because he's already 64, north of 65. It's going to be pretty hard to land that type of job. The obvious question is, what type of longevity is he going to have? You know, is he down to coach for a while? That said, we've seen guys coach well into their 70s that still have the juice. Maybe this is his final destination. We just don't know at this point. I mean, maybe he doesn't click well with some of the current players. Like, you know, there are things like that. But there aren't a ton. This isn't a situation like it was with Adazio, where it's you're stretching to try and find anything to talk yourself into, to a point where it's like, I guess he almost went 500 in the ACC a couple of times. Like, it just, there was not much to be excited about. And you look at what he's done, you look at how his offenses have evolved, you look at the connections he has in the game. On paper, this is a good hire. But if you're playing devil's advocate, on paper, Mike Bobo was a good hire. On paper, Jay Norvell was a good hire. Neither of them panned out. In the long run, there are no guarantees. All that you can try and do is have as good of a process as possible. And I think that CSU did an extensive search. They kept everything in-house. It wasn't a circus like it can be with a lot of schools. I love all of that. And you were able to land a quality coach who very, realistically could have landed a Power 4 job this cycle, especially if he had been willing to be more patient and wait for some of the dominoes to fall. Now, sometimes you do that and then you end up in a wonky scenario and you're at like a, excuse my language, but dog shit Power 4 school that never has an opportunity to compete. Maybe he views CSU as the sleeping giant that we've always believed it to be. But on paper, there's just not a whole lot to whine about when it comes to this decision. And I think of the realistic options that were on the table, this makes a lot of sense. And while it would have been interesting to see with them go with somebody like Colin Klein, who I think a lot of the fans wanted, and I certainly was intrigued by, but I was a big fan of Colin Klein when he was at Kansas State. So I think there's probably some personal bias that comes into that. I think that it would have been a big gamble to go with somebody who'd never been a head coach before. I get you can't be a head coach until you are a head coach. We've seen plenty of up and comers, take that opportunity and really run with it, seize the day. But the Rams can't afford to miss on this, guys. They've already had to reset 4 times in a decade. If they miss on this hire based on the way things are trending right now with the sport, like, you're going to fall into total irrelevancy, a hole that you may never be able to climb out of and may never even get the opportunity based on the way some things are changing. They need somebody who can win now. And while there are no guarantees, I think that Mora's track record is as encouraging as anybody that could have possibly been on the table. Wish he could coach the Air Force game. Why not at this point? Say that mostly tongue in cheek. Probably the last matchup we see between CSU and Air Force on Friday for quite some time. Calhoun made it pretty clear that he has no interest in continuing the series. He's been whining about NIL a lot the last couple of years, and that's fair. I understand it's a tough spot, but I've always kind of said it's not really a game that either side cares about. Air Force obviously cares about the commander-in-chief matchups, and if you're CSU, Wyoming, and CU are your regional rivals. Air Force is just somebody who you played in the Mountain West era. I mean, they played a little bit before that, but really up until the Mountain West era, didn't have a ton of association. Air Force 39, 22-1. It hasn't been that competitive. The Rams trying to win their second straight in the series for the first time since the early 2000s. CSU won 3 straight under Sonny from 2001 to 2003. Haven't won 2 straight games since, which is just embarrassing, to be honest with you. The Rams won 21-13 in the Springs last year. These teams are so drastically different. There's not a whole lot you can take away from that game that's going to apply this time around. Air Force has moved the ball pretty decently, although they've had a revolving door at quarterback this year. Defensively, they've really struggled, although they've been better in conference play, so that's something to keep an eye on. And it's not like the CSU offense exactly strikes fear in you, but they have been pretty leaky. This maybe is just going to be a weird, wonky game. I mean, I'm guessing it's Taj Bullock starting at quarterback, although I don't know at this point. This might be the most wonky, irrelevant football game between two bad teams that we've had in quite some time. But it would be fun to say that you went out with 2 straight wins, get a trophy win under your belt, despite this year being a disaster. Doesn't really change anything other than it would just keep the vibes riding high into the weekend after an exciting moment with CSU getting its new head coach. I will have some hoops content, obviously, over these next couple of days as well, although we will certainly be really focused on football and the future of the program and what this looks like. I'm going to get as much content out on the written side as I can for you guys. If you're not a DNVR diehard, now's the perfect time to become one. You get access to all of our premium content. There's a great sale going on right now. Check it all out. You can also, if you are a diehard, take advantage of our early access to our Black Friday sale. If not, everything will basically be on sale Friday, but sometimes stuff sells out. So if you're into that, check all that out. I'm curious to see what CSU does this afternoon. You're coming off of a catastrophic loss against DU. Really a landmine to your resume, which is brutal. You're hoping to avoid that, but the Rams have been pretty good on Feast Week historically, at least in the Medved era. You've got a couple of MTE wins. They won, I think, the Great Alaskan Shootout under Larry back in that would have been about 2014, I think. I remember coming back from Kansas on Thanksgiving, driving to Fort Collins and listening to that game on the radio back in the JJ Avila days. Had a lot of love for that team. They were fun, but if you're the Rams, you need to be so much better defensively than what we've seen these last couple of games. Really don't feel like they've been locked in on that side with consistency since the first 10 minutes or so of the first half against Loyola. That's not an intriguing trend. Offensively, can you get the pace up a little bit? I don't want to see the ball be so stagnant. Way too much one-on-one play in this last matchup. I think DU threw the Rams off with the way they switch things 1 through 5, but obviously I would expect more of that from Virginia Tech, given how successful it was in stymieing an offense that had been one of the more efficient and productive units in the country leading in. Got the Brandon Recksteiner revenge game factor going. You obviously hope that sometimes when you're in this spot, you can want it too bad. That was definitely the case with Neek and Boulder last year. That was probably his worst game of the season. Sometimes, especially somebody like him who's not afraid to let it fly, that could be a positive or a negative for CSU today. We shall see. You got to continue to lean on these post guys. What you're getting out of Jorgensen and Booth is really intriguing. Want to see more Bemba in the mix. Want to continue to see McIver and Butler get a bigger role, especially if the defensive struggles are consistent. And then, can your top scorers shine? Because you're going to need the guys you brought in to get buckets to produce in this type of setting. If you win, you're probably facing St. Mary's. So again, a really big opportunity here to, one, help recover from a brutal loss metric-wise against DU. And then 2, getting a rhythm here before the biggest home game of the non-conference slate in CU. And then obviously you've got to perform well in the conference portion, because it's looking like the Mountain West is going to be a 2-bid league at best, which is a bummer based on how things have been the last couple of years. I'm excited. We'll have content through all of it. I love Thanksgiving. I hope you guys all have a great week. I know it's not exactly what a lot of us were taught in school, but appreciate your loved ones. Appreciate what you do have. A holiday filled with football and the people you love. I mean, that sounds pretty good to me. I don't get to do Thanksgiving with my family anymore because it's out of state, and with the college football schedule, I'm just unfortunately not able to make it happen. It was always one of my holidays. It is one of those that I kind of get in my feels about, but I'm so thankful for what I get to do. And to be honest with you, getting this news was a big boost for me. It'll greatly improve the vibes for J-Mike on Thanksgiving. So much love to all of you guys. Thank you for listening to the DNVR Rams podcast presented by Branded Bills. He'll use that code BBDNVR for 15% off. Head to brandedbills.com. Again, use that code BBDNVR for 15% off your first order. We back, y'all. The vibes are back. Always proud to be. Peace.
We all silly like the mayor.